welcome everyone to Downtime. With me today is Commander Lance McMillan and the fireplace. Commander, how are you? That's good. So, oh dear Lord, like I said, I got a little triggered by the what is it? The video released from Colorado. It was two police officers had been called. Apparently, somebody was opening cars at a high school and jumping into the cars and harassing people. Well, it turned out it was just one guy who mistook somebody else's car for his. He thought it was his mother's car. He hopped in, found his mother wasn't in there. In fact, some strange lady was in there. So it was just like, who's in this car? Who's in my car? And then he realized he was in the wrong car, and he left. But this triggered the cops and some exaggerated reporting of what had transpired. And he ends up in his mother's car, and the cops come. And let's see here. They say they can't hear you, so I'm gonna let me see if that should bring you in. So he ended. I can hear you just fine. They say you're muted, and so it would be on my end. I turned up the NDI, so either there's an echo of you now at this point, or hopefully they can hear you. So, anyways, the long story short, as he was in there, and they're talking to him, and they weren't being they were being rather. I don't know. They weren't being belligerent, but they weren't being or friendly or engaging, and they were very accusatory, and he clearly got some answers a little confused. He sort of misremembered the name of his brother. He misremembered whether it was his car. He didn't even misremember. He called his mother's car his car, and then he clarified later, well, it's my mom's car. They're like, okay, that's it. And then he popped a pill of something, I don't know, like an anxiety med or something, I don't know, but they saw that and like, what'd you just take? And then they yanked him out of the car. He's grasping for anything he can get. Apparently one of them thought he was grasping for his their belt, so they shot him 3 times in the chest. No CPR, no nothing after that. He just bled out right on the sidewalk. His mother's screaming, is my child okay? And they're like, oh, get back in the car. We're assessing. It's like, they're just standing over him as he's bleeding out. So they were found not to have done anything wrong, and there you go. Yeah. So, yeah, that was. Anyways, I found that triggering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think. It does cut both ways. Being a cop is a really tough job, and it's oftentimes thankless. You always have to treat it as extremely dangerous. It's honestly not that dangerous most of the time, but when it gets dangerous extremely rapidly. You don't have much of a choice in the matter, and things are already out of control by the time you've realized that it's become dangerous. So my father once described it as hours upon hours, even days or months of sheer boredom followed by seconds of sheer terror. And part of that, I think, is because of the ubiquity of guns in this country. You could be facing an armed somebody or other at any moment. Anyways, but it's so it's hard, and I think they should get paid more. But I think they should also treat the citizens that they patrol with respect. These guys weren't abusive, but it certainly wasn't respect. And it looks like they were looking for trouble. I think they were looking for trouble. And when you're looking for trouble, you know what, you're going to find it, and you're going to plug some guy in the chest 3 times. This guy was unarmed and did nothing wrong. He had broken no law. So why is he dead? And somebody had pointed out, well, he was resisting arrest. It is impossible. It's impossible for a human being to not resist when somebody unexpectedly grabs you and yanks you out of a car. I don't care if they're a cop. I don't care what they are. And since this guy clearly had difficulties with police before and said he didn't trust cops, mainly because he felt that they beat citizens while they were resisting arrest, you can see, and he's not wrong. It's happened. You can see why somebody's going to be concerned about that. So these cops should have realized if you yank him out of the car, he's going to have you could try talking to him, but apparently that's a no-no. Anyways, that's it. So I'm sure we'll have discussions on it later, and it's a worthwhile discussion. But disagree? You don't think it's but you haven't seen it. You've only heard my version of it. But that's what are your thoughts?
No, I know, but it bugs me that in this country the default for any police encounter with the civilian community is to immediately start with the premise that they are your enemy and must be dealt with forcefully. And I don't think that's the right approach. It's just me,
Well, there are a lot of countries that don't try that approach, and they, I was reading a comparison of officers killed in Canada versus killed in the U.S. and the number of civilians killed by officers. U.S. has killed, I forget what the number was, but it seemed like, stuff from memory, like 5 times as many citizens killed by police in the U.S. and far more officers also killed by citizens. So it's kind of a two-way thing. But the problem is one of these sides is paid to be professional and to try to keep the peace. And that I can tell they're the ones in a lot of these cases that are escalating it. We have a video too of a 17-year-old boy who got pulled over for flashing his lights at someone in a state where you weren't allowed to do that. And the cop had one hell of a fucking attitude. The boy had a bigger attitude. The boy was arrogant and thought he knew what the fuck he was doing and thought he knew the law, and he knew jack shit about the law. He's 17 years old. He's a minor. He's not supposed to know about the law.
Regardless, that doesn't provide grounds for law enforcement to just decide, well, the proper solution for somebody not kissing my ass is to blow them away.
Yep. Yeah, which of course they don't feel is what they're doing. They feel they're just, reminding them who's boss, which is of course the guy with the fucking gun, despite the fact that, he's actually supposed to be working for the people. But, and that's what he was doing. He was just trying to remind the kid who's boss, and the kid didn't like being reminded who was boss. And, it just escalated from there. And that's why I like this idea of escalation. People are like, well, he didn't intend to shoot anybody. I get that. But if you're the one who's armed and the other person is unarmed, you're responsible if that gun discharges in every case but for they're actually going for that gun. In basically every case for that, you have to, I'd like, and the base question that people are sitting there going, it really isn't being answered is, how is a guy who, from all we can tell, intended no harm to any living human being, who was unarmed, how did he end up dead? How did he end up getting shot 3 times in the chest? And there's no explanation for that except it was a reasonable encounter. He did not mean harm to anybody. I dare anybody to find a counter to that. Now, he's also, I wouldn't be surprised if he was on the spectrum. Some of his answers were atypical. They weren't the way I would expect the question to be answered. And they asked if he was on drugs, and I can understand wanting to ask that question. He may have been. To the best of our knowledge now, a year after the fact, nobody's found any evidence he was. Maybe he was neuroatypical, or maybe there's any number of other things. Again, none of this is grounds for shooting. And that's not how the officers didn't walk in there with the intent of doing it, but you have to realize that when you're going to start swinging that gun around like a big dick, somebody's going to die. That's your fault, but we protect them. We protect them because it's a hard job. Well, in part, it's a hard job because of other issues, but nonetheless, it's sort of like, yeah, they don't have to act like, anyways. Doesn't matter. This was just what happened. And then Starsky was on CBS today. That was interesting.
I saw. Very impressive.
Well, it was funny. Titan sent that to me. And he was just like, holy shit. And I was just like, what is this? And I saw it was on Ukraine. I was just like, oh no, did somebody like blow something up or what the hell? So I start to play it. I'm playing it in the background, and they're like, okay, we're gonna, go talk to, we have a soldier who wants to talk about the Homestill battle, and I was just like, okay, we're gonna hear about that. And all of a sudden, I hear the voice, and I recognize it instantly. I was just like, whoa! I was like, wait a minute.
Dude, I know you.
I know that guy. And I go, and there he is, doing his thing. So,
yep.
That's an interesting question. I got somebody who I try to be careful with this, and I'm not always successful. This is a liberal show. It is a left-leaning show. I genuinely try to have people who are right-leaning on it. Is Andring is right-leaning. I try to make sure that he gets a fair hearing. He doesn't always, and he probably doesn't have much recourse if I don't. He's very good about that. So I try to be fair. Just because I try doesn't mean I succeed, and I'm not the one who's going to be able to judge how fair I am. But it is important to me that we do that, because I'm not going to become better if I'm not challenged by people on the right, and if I don't sometimes recognize that they're right and I'm wrong, which happens. Don't ever tell a Xandring I said that. But it does. It happens. But somebody was complaining about our coverage of Ukraine and having Starsky on, and they're like, well, everything he's saying is BS. So it's like, oh yeah, why is that? He goes, well, he's a press officer, and that did get me thinking. I was just like, okay, that's true. He's a press officer, and his job is to highlight what's going on in the war, and to put the best possible spin on it. I'm perfectly comfortable with that and having him on, because everything I've seen has told me that he's been really quite honest with us, and there's always how seriously does the military take press officers and engaging with the press in? I imagine is it a new thing that they've really started taking it seriously, that you have to get the press on your side because you need people's support, or do you know much about how that's been, at least in the U.S.?
Okay, understanding that I was last on active duty some 18 years ago.
Okay.
And it definitely has changed since then. But when I was on active service, the general perception amongst most people was that PAOs, public affairs officers, were kind of a necessary evil, and their primary function was to free up the commander so he didn't have to waste his time dealing with the press, that they would do it for him.
Okay.
Very cynical to say that, but that was, generally speaking, the perception. I think it would be fair to say that in the modern environment, it's becoming increasingly evident to anybody who's paying attention that winning that battle in the noosphere is just as important in some ways as winning the battle on the battlefield. So having the right person filling that job, that critical PAO job, is very important. That makes sense?
It does. Titan sent me something that I wanted to discuss another element of, and it seems to be an evolving story as we speak. It's always interesting when there's breaking news while you're doing a show on a different topic.
Oh, goody!
Like, what's the etiquette that we had on Dr. Sygart, and I forget what we were talking about, but we were talking something. I think it was early COVID, and we were talking. we were talking. I think actually because he had worked for the Centers for Disease Control and he knew Fauci, so we were talking about Fauci's experience and all this other stuff. And as we're doing it, Iran and Iraq starts blowing up and they're fighting each other and all this other shit's going on. And I'm just like, okay, he's a respected guest. I sit there and say, okay, sorry, listen, World War III is breaking out. I gotta go. What's the etiquette? I don't. This one's not quite that breaking, but it's an evolving thing that we'll talk about in a second. Anyways, yeah, I mean, I get the impression that the Ukrainian army is taking PR very, very seriously, and both in terms of keeping their behavior above board because they know everybody's watching, and making sure that they've got someone to get their version of events out, which has been extraordinarily important, especially considering the way Russia does its own, the way Russia engages, the propaganda is its own weapon and its own style of combat.
Absolutely.
But we had talked about this before. The only thing is, I know Starsky's been on the front lines more than once, and it's sort of like he's now in the back. He's in Kyiv. They're getting hit, so it's not like he's perfectly safe. Nobody's perfectly safe in the country, but it's a different thing, and what he's doing is extremely important. But it's like, I'd be wrestling with that. But Starsky seems to see himself as a soldier first. He's like he's doing what he's ordered, and that's what he's going to do. But it's I don't know. I have to believe you wrestle with that. We've discussed that before.
Yeah, I agree, and I think another important element to that is that Starsky came up through the ranks, and so he didn't get moved into this slot until he was already battle tested, so to speak. So he probably feels more affinity, more relatability with the troops on the lines than he does with, rear echelon senior commanders having to deal with the press and politicians and so forth.
We got a new thing. We'll have to make sure that we mention this with Starsky tomorrow. So China has now said that they would like to mediate peace between Russia and Ukraine. So they have offered to host a. Would that be a trilateral? I guess if they're hosting, it's well, they'd like to host talks between the two to organize peace. But at the same time, according to Der Spiegel, they've just come out. Russia and China have entered negotiations for China to supply Russia with suicide drones for use in Ukraine.
Yeah, and this is one of my contentions all along, is that for a negotiated settlement to be possible, even ignoring the whole thing about, Putin has to be willing to negotiate, and that's not going to happen because if he does, then it's pretty much a dead man. But the key is that you have to find somebody who's going to act in a capacity as the honest broker, who is willing to represent both sides impartially. And Russia is not going to accept anybody who is a NATO member in that role. And I seriously doubt that the Ukraine is going to be willing to accept a country like China or Iran or North Korea as that impartial broker on their behalf, because they're obviously so committed to the enough global diplomatic gravitas to be able to fill that role yet. I mean, I think people are hoping that maybe India might stand up, or Brazil, perhaps. I don't know, but I'm not sure that they're big enough. I hate to use that term because it sounds like I'm, trying to minimize their importance on the world stage, and I'm not, but I'm just saying, in a situation like this, I think you need somebody who really does have a commanding presence, and I don't see that either of those countries bring that to the table.
So I gave Titan a little one of us is muted while there's my audio may have cut out.
Need to check the fire, it's really smoky.
I know, I already did.
Oh.
I opened the window and then.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're good.
The electronics have all decided to. I think I've used this headset since day one. I bought it actually just for this. I love the headset. It's a spectacular headset, but it's now every 30 minutes or so restarting and resetting, and it disconnects me from and everything just goes. And it's not the only. It's in time. The Titan thinks I generate a field that just destroys electronic equipment, and I'm not convinced he's wrong. Oh, if you knew this weekend.
Nick's anti-electronic field.
Well, I told my daughters, I don't want them to think critically, right? And we've got like 10 computers in this house easily. And they're like, why is one always broken? I was just like, they're like, is it you? I was like, yes, I know. It seems like it's my technical skills, but let's just think about this for a minute. I was like, let's assume a computer breaks on average once a year. If we have, say, 12 computers in this house, right, then there's, on average, you're going to get one broken.
One down every month.
Every month. And she looked at me and she goes, that makes a lot of sense. But in this case, I think it's just you. This is my own kid.
Thanks, kid.
I was like, she didn't even bother with the math. She's just like, no, I can do the math on that, but I don't need to. It's you. Ooh, fucking A.
I just, by sheer coincidence, had a run-in with somebody about something quite similar. My father had people, he was, to put it politely, technologically unskilled. So anytime anything was a problem, he would call one of his friends in to fix his computer. And in many cases, these are people who are like techno geeks. So, you need this thing on your computer. And they kept adding things to it. And of course, he had no idea what they were, how they worked, what they would do. And these just kept piling up in layers and layers and layers. So anyway, one of his friends programmed it so that his space bar said something. I can't remember what it was, but it was like mildly insulting. And he thought it was just hilarious. And like 3 or 4 hours later, he calls the guy up. I need you to come and fix my computer. It's broken. It's saying insulting things to me.
I used to build computers. I got out of that business because somebody tried to rip us off and came very close to doing it. A company tried to buy 500 hard drives from the company I had started. And I was like, that was the largest order we'd ever had. And we got a check from them, and the check was good. I called twice to confirm that the check was good. Everything was fine. But I called the company that had issued the check and never got an answer from them. The day we were supposed to ship it out, I decided to go call the company one more time. And I finally talked to someone in accounting, and I just say, okay, I just want to make sure that this check was good. Like, yeah, the check's good, but we haven't written it. I was just like, what do you mean? She goes, we're not up to that in our check ledger yet, so that check hasn't been written. It's like, so you're not looking at one of our checks that's got that number on it. It's like, I give you my word, I'm looking at one of these checks that has this number on it. It's written out to like 28,000 or however much. And she goes, no, you're really not. I said, well, listen, why don't you go look for it? Because I've got to tell you, this is a real check. And she goes, it's not, sir. And I said, could you please just indulge and look? She goes, okay, fine. I said, but I got to tell you, we haven't even reached that set. And then just quiet.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, an entire page of checks had been stolen. And somebody was writing against their account for it, which means we probably would have actually get to keep the money because the money would have been from the theft from them. But I'm sitting there going, like, I'm starting this small business. I'm trying to start a family, doing all these other things. It's like, the rates of fraud and people trying to rip you off, I was like, I don't need that risk. So I started freelancing, and I was working for this guy in Connecticut, and it was it was actually in a lot of ways a lot of fun. I was their best tech guy, if that tells you anything. But I remember a lady had brought in a computer once, and she goes, well, I think there's something wrong with the computer. I was just like, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, it's not, something's not working right, and I'm just concerned about it. Could you check? I was just like, I need something more than that. So would you please just check? I'll pay whatever the cost. She's like, okay, sure, I'll check. And the first question I asked is, have you taken this to Geek Squad? I learned to always ask that question first, because anyone who took it to Geek Squad when they brought it back, I know there were 20 unnecessary components in there that have been added, It's like, and it's all,
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's what got me thinking about it, because with Geek Squad, if you wanted to add a new hard drive, they're like, well, you have to add a new IDE card with, a new SDCI chain, or SCSI, whatever. It's been so long I can't even remember the acronyms. But the new chain to connect a new master drive. And actually, that'd be right if you had 3 other drives in there. But if you only have 1 drive and not that many other components, you got plenty of space on the IDE chain to, no. So I'd see like a clean IDE chain already in there, and they added 2 more and slaved the drive to one of the added ones. So I was like, okay, you got twice as many chains as you need. And okay, so it's okay. It wasn't Geek Squad. Open the thing up. Really nice graphics processor in there, liquid cooling, the whole 9 yards. Turn the thing on, and this blue flame just goes right along the graphics card, just like that. I was like, okay, that's unusual behavior in a PC.
Yeah.
Turn that off. Well, and I still don't know how. So what had happened was the liquid cooling, one of the cables holding the liquid cooling was a cheap cable, and it had hit an element on the heat sink of the graphics card. It had melted, and the coolant had gotten onto the graphics card. It still probably shouldn't have caused a fire. A short, yeah, but not a fire. But anyways, yeah, that was a lot. And then the other one, I'm just gonna tell this story. It's almost a little. It was I forget. My boss billed me out at like 40 an hour. I got to keep about 20 of it, a little less. A lady had a computer problem. I go over there, and I fixed it in about 5 minutes. And I'm leaving, and she's like, well, and she starts talking about her kids and her family. And what I realized, I felt really bad, because I was like, I have to bill her for this time. So she's getting billed as she's talking to me, and it ended up being like 90 minutes before I felt like I could extricate myself from there. I felt bad because she was getting billed. Well, and the next day, calls, problems back. I was like, there's no way, I fucking fixed it. I go back, she broke it again. So I'd come and talk to her.
Oh, one of those.
Didn't mind the billing. Didn't mind, And I did 90 minutes. At first, I thought I could do it just because I was like, I could get paid. I could sit here all day and just get paid 20. But I realized I couldn't do it. In part was well, it wasn't even the guilt, because it's like, if that's what she wants to do. But I was just like, I'm not a therapist. I'm a computer tech guy. But yeah, it was one of those, and there was more of those than you. It was surprising. It was surprising how many of those there were.
No, I had a part-time job, I suppose you could call it, when I was in college, and I would go over to the old folks retirement community and help with light cleaning and filing for some of the people there. And it quickly became apparent that any light cleaning I was doing was something I could pretty much finish in about 5 to 10 minutes. If there was any filing, that similarly would probably be done in about 5 to 10 minutes. But they wanted me to just sit there, so they had somebody to talk to for the better part of an hour. They were lovely. And, I totally get it.
Yeah, I get it more so. I mean, I'm a hermit. I've always worked alone. Not always worked alone. I suppose I worked or worked from home. Sorry, for the most part, I spent most of what I've done, I've worked from home. And whether it's teaching, doing this, whatever it is, not teaching, sorry, writing. But yeah, especially right before the right before the lockdowns, it's like, everybody's gone, the kids are at school, and at first you like it for the first 4 or 5 hours, but then you start going stir crazy. You're the only one in the house, so it's just like, do we need to call the exterminator? Just have him come in and chat for a few minutes.
Hi, I'd need a dog trainer to come by. Where's your dog? Oh, I don't have a dog. I just want to learn how to train dogs.
Well, it's also it's an awkward situation too. It's you don't know how to, but there's a lot of that. Speaking, I was. Well, no, it was an awkward. It was awkward.
Yes.
Anyways, it's good to see. I was gonna say it's good to see Starsky, get on the move and getting stuff done. But yeah,
no, it never ceases to surprise me when I see him talking to people outside of our little show that we'll be presumably doing with him tomorrow. When he's talking with other people, how thoroughly professional he is about the whole thing. I mean, he really comes across as far more practiced than I think he really is. And I think it's a combination of raw talent and a genuine interest in doing what he's doing.
I think so. I think he's also. I think he's genuinely proud of his country, which he's got a lot to be proud of, and I think so. He likes getting the opportunity to talk about it. It's also you got to remember, and I mean, I know this sounds patently obvious, but I think it's easy to forget. English is, of course, not even close to his first language, and he finds a way. The two things that are impressive is one that he finds a way to really explain himself quite well, and every now and then you pick up a little like, okay, that's not quite how you say that in English, but I get it. But the other thing is, most of the time, because I grew up around so many people speaking foreign languages and being exposed to people for whom English was not a native language, I find I don't even have to concentrate to modulate and moderate how I speak when I'm around foreigners. I stop using contractions. I speak a little bit slower. I start using sort of the less nuanced vocabulary, and I just instinctively, when I'm around someone for whom English is not a native language, I realized I don't think I've done that with Starsky once, and the entire time we've been talking to him, we've done like 18 or 19 shows. I think once I got the impression we were speaking just a touch too fast, and it may have just been he was distracted doing something else, or may have had nothing to do with the English.
Yeah, but an observation I would make, and I've heard this from a number of people who are not native English speakers, and they say English is one of the toughest languages to learn to speak well, but it is also one of the easiest languages to be able to communicate in, because there's so little formal structure to it that you can get away with absolutely mangling the grammar, organization, punctuation, whatever you want to call it, of a sentence. And most people, even if they're not English speakers themselves, will still understand what the hell it is you're trying to say.
That's a really good point. I had never considered that.
But if you try to do something similar in a lot of foreign languages, if you're not using the correct tense, gender, and organizational formalities of the language, you may as well be speaking gibberish.
Well, and case, which English does have cases, but very, very few, and we don't even, so few we don't even realize. So I, me, and my are not three different words. We think they're three different words. They're not. They're actually one word. The word is I. That's the nominative case. If we're talking the possessive case, that would be my. That's the possessive case of I. The objective case, if we are talking about somebody or something, that would so that would be me. Me, my, I. That's it. Those are the three cases, and they only apply in a few very rare circumstances in English. And you can screw them up, and everybody's going to get it. You know, if you
if you say that is I house, people would still have a pretty clear idea of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
That is my house.
Russian has 6 cases, and they apply to every single noun. Every noun, including proper nouns like names. So my name is Nick. In Russian, usually go by Kolya. If we're talking about me in the sense that I am not present, it's actually then I think it's Kolya. If it's about me, it's Kolyu. If it's to me, it's Kolye. My name changes based on the case, and cases go different. They are declinated.
It's Thursday and it's raining. Okay, I gotta change it now.
And that's different than conjugation, which goes by a completely different process. And there's 6 of those. So that you conjugate one way, you declinate a whole different way, and it's all in English. It's like there's very little conjugation. There's almost no declination, and you can just throw it all together. So that's a really good, but it's so irregular in so many ways. I think that's why they say, because half the verbs are irregular. It certainly is. I'll say this for Russian. I'll say this for authoritarian governments. It's a lot easier to spell if it's an authoritarian government. I'm just going to say this. I don't think I've ever misspelled a Russian word, because it's just like they said, now you spell word this way. It's just like they literally do that. Their dictionaries
Soviet Russia, you do not spell word spells you.
They literally, their dictionaries are proscriptive. This is how it is spelled. This is what it means, and this is how you're going to use it. And they review it every year, and they update it. So there's irregularities, but far fewer. That's not Esperanto, and I have absolutely no intention of learning Esperanto. Esperanto succum bigum, as far as I'm concerned. But at any rate, yeah, so I can see why. Anyways, I've always thought of English as a much harder language to learn than most people give it credit for, and I get these mixed. Like some people say, "Oh, it's really hard," and other people say, "No, it's really easy." And I think the way you put it frames my experience with it well. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, yeah, you can speak bastardized English pretty quickly, and
oh yeah,
well.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, I had a chance encounter with a woman from Haiti who probably spoke no more than 5 words of English. But between hand gestures and, using those 5 words, she was able to convey, she needed help with finding her way to the bus stop that would take her to this location, kind of thing. And I think a lot of it really gets down to the fact that it's that flexible and that willing to adapt to itself.
I think I told you this story before, and we talked about this one. I mean, Russian culture is fascinating. And very different, I think very hard for Westerners to truly wrap their heads around. Spending time there and really learning to see seeing how the natives operate day to day, I think is a big help in that. But there was my wife and I were shopping. We were in some like Macy's or chain store, whatever. And my wife had a whole bunch of coupons. Well, it turned out she had a whole bunch of coupons that both applied to the same thing. You couldn't use them twice. And some serious savings, she felt. So, or sorry, let me rephrase that. She was earning serious money through these coupons. And it's a joke. I'm not trying to, she uses that joke all the time. She's like, I found all these coupons. Let's go out and earn money. Okay. So she offers them to the lady behind us. And the lady behind us, in a pretty thick Russian accent, oh, no, do not understand. No English. Sorry. And my wife, for whatever reason, she's just like, is that Russian? I said, yeah, that's Russian. And she goes, okay, could you? I said, sure. And I think she knew something was up and just wanted to. So, I just told her in Russian. I said, oh, listen, my wife has these. We don't need them. Do you want them? And she replies in perfect English. She's just
yes.
Yeah, no, sir. Thank you very much. I do not need. And I was just like, okay. It was just like, and my wife was shocked. I was like, I wasn't. I was like, she's 90% sure I'm KGB, and she doesn't care. She doesn't care whether I am or am not. I'm either KGB, CIA, or a citizen, and either way, I'm sus.
Have I told you my dad's experience in Japan?
I don't remember. No, I don't recall it.
So this is in the early 50s, so it's right after the war. And he and another guy are out driving around in the backwoods of Japan, very rural farming community kind of thing, because they're trying to find this retired Japanese officer that they wanted to interview about something. And the guy who's riding with my dad is a fluent Japanese speaker. And when I say fluent, it's not just he spoke Japanese. It's like he could do 15 or 20 different accents.
Holy shit.
Yeah. No, I mean, he was, I'm going to get the name of the school wrong, but it was an Ivy League school, and he was the head of the professor of Japanese studies there. So he really knew his stuff. And they stop, because they're lost in the countryside, and they stop at this crossroads where there's a couple of Japanese farmers. And the guy gets out, and he tries to communicate with them, basically saying, is this the road to Kanagawa, or whatever it was? And the two Japanese guys are sitting there looking at him and looking at each other. And he says, this is after the fact, he says, they were saying, do you know what he's saying? I have no idea what he's saying. And he can understand exactly what they're saying to one another. And he's saying, no, I'm just asking you, which is the way to Kanagawa? Okay, how about if I try it with this accent? How about in this dialect? None of it works. And finally he just says, okay, I give up. Let's just go down the road in this direction. Maybe we can find a town. And he's getting back in the Jeep, and they're starting to drive off. He hears one farmer turn to the other guy and says, it's the strangest thing. I could have sworn that Gaijin was speaking Japanese. Gaijin being, of course, the Japanese word for foreigner.
Foreigner. I think I've already told you that my experience with Japanese and Russian as a translator, and the people here have heard that a few times. I'm sure I'll tell it again, but I'll save it for later. But the other one, my father not only, I've told you, spoke and practiced law in 6 languages, but really, there was something my father told me about when he was first at a university, and he went and took the time to learn, to get to know all the people who ran the cafeteria. And it's like, and everyone else thought, they're better about, I think this was BU, but so, big school, and everyone thought they're better than everyone at the cafeteria. He learned to talk to them, and when they were Portuguese or whatever, learned to talk to them in their language. And he said he never regretted, spending time with the unwashed masses or whatever was beneath other people, because it was like, these were the people who really actually got things done. And if you knew them, it gave you one hell of an advantage over everybody else. So he actually cared about how their cultures worked and how they operated as people. And he cared about, he also did a lot of work as a public defender, because nobody wanted to defend somebody who and they used all the racial epithets. Even in Massachusetts, especially, 40, 50 years ago, they weren't huge fans of defending, some Mexican who came in and purportedly caused trouble and doesn't even speak the language. So he'd go and he'd defend these guys. But one day he had a buddy who was an excellent, quote, excellent German speaker, and had one of the best technical abilities in German that he had ever seen. And my father said, I knew he was going to get in trouble real quick. And sure enough, there was some law firm that my father knew was trying to organize a deal for some kind of pipe, like gas pipe, in Germany. And they were getting stonewalled by the Germans, and in fact, the Germans were getting ready to cancel the deal, and nobody could figure out why. So finally, they brought my father's friend in, and he spoke with them for about 30 seconds before they hung up the phone on him. And my father said, well, what'd you say? And he said, I said, with all due respect, sir, can we please speak about it? He goes, oh, shit, you didn't say that to a German, did you? He goes, oh, no. He goes, let me do it. And are you sure? He goes, yeah. And his technical expertise wasn't quite as good, but he knew how to talk the way Germans were used to speaking. I said the first thing he did when he got on the phone, the guy picks up on the other line. He goes, hey, you cocksucker, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Are you going to make a deal with us? Or, are you shitting in my pants? And all this other, he just starts swearing up a storm. Oh, the other guys, you know what? Let me get you talking to the boss. And they just put him onto the boss. Like, how the fuck did you do that? He goes, they do not respect anybody. He goes, first of all, with the German language, either you speak it perfectly or don't speak it at all. Anywhere in the middle, you tend to offend them because they figure, why'd you bother learning it if you're not going to bother learning it correctly? He goes, but part of that correctly is learning how to speak colloquially and learning how to swear. And they do not trust you if you're not willing to swear when you're fucking pissed off. So, so that was it. So he saved the deal because he said that was one of the things he said too. He said he was a tutor. I said when I teach students German, the first thing I do is teach them swears. And you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot by what's the first things you learn in any language. For me, when I was learning Russian, the first thing I learned was 𝗢𝗙𝗲𝗙, 𝗓𝗪, which is give me a beer, please. That was the first thing. Like, you need to know this phrase. If you don't know this phrase, you're getting nowhere. It's like you're joking.
Nowhere.
Like,
and the next thing was, can I have a vodka, please?
yeah, exactly. Well, no, the next one was 𝗢𝗲𝗲. Do you have running water? That was. But it
varies from country to country, because when we lived in India, because my dad never made any great effort to learn any Hindi, and even learning Hindi in India is kind of a fool's errand because there were like 900 separate languages and dialects throughout the subcontinent. So the fact that you speak Hindi does not mean that the other 100 people you're talking to, even one of them speaks Hindi. So now that's changed, but at least when we were there, it was very, very different. But he made an effort to pick up, a few words and phrases. And he said, nothing got you more admiration and respect than going out to one of the small villages and actually saying a few words in Hindi, because it was like, holy cow, a white man who's deigned to learn our language. Oh, yeah, and it was a legacy of the British Raj system, where you didn't dare, let the locals know that you were onto them, kind of thing. You forced them to speak your language, not the other way around.
I have a dictionary of swears in foreign languages. I'm trying to find out where it is, but my father insisted, and so it's like I can look up. But I love the words. It's like the words that also don't sound like if I'm speaking to an American who has no idea what Russian is, and I'm just like, tell me a swear in Russian. I was like, sure, 𝐒𝐚dź-𝗲𝗄. And like, well, what does that mean? I was like, oh, you don't want to. That's serious shit. I said, don't say that unless you really mean it. 𝗢𝗲𝗲, of course, meaning where's the bathroom.
Well, do you remember the movie Patton with George C. Scott?
Yes.
So at the end of the movie, there's a scene where he's having a banquet with, I think it's Marshal Timoshenko. I can't remember who it is. But the exchange translated is something along the lines of, let us toast the defeat of Germany, and Patton says, I'm not going to drink with him or any other Russian son of a bitch. And Patton forces him to translate exactly what he said to the Soviet marshal, who gets very offended and said, something along the lines of, well, you also are a son of a bitch. He says, okay, I'll drink to that. One son of a bitch to another.
No.
But they use the real phrase, son of a bitch, in Russian. And the Russians that we were watching the movie with, I mean, you'd think that it was just like the world coming to an, he said a dirty word. Because that was not done in Soviet cinema.
Well, and in the U.S. cinema, I think you kind of have to avoid it if you want it to be palatable. I was watching Hunt for Red October, and half of the words in that are actually Russian, and half are completely fucking made up. So I have no idea. I was like, that isn't a language. What the why not just go all made up or all Russian? And it's like, it's just like he'll say one Russian word and then a phrase that doesn't mean anything in any language I know of, and then a couple more Russian words, and I was just like, oh, okay. And my wife was like, oh, can you tell me what they were saying? I was like, no.
It was in Russian. That's about the farthest I'm going to be able to get.
Some of it was in Russian. Well, no, I actually had I had a Russian friend of mine look at this. I say, "Am I missing something?" He's like, "No, this is." He goes, "What is this?" I was just like, well, That's why I brought you along. I was like, "Am I missing some secret dialect?" There's a great series of books called Wicked, and then the name of the language. So Wicked Spanish, Wicked German, Wicked English, Wicked whatever. And it's sort of like the naughty aspects of the language, but it's like culturally whatever. So Wicked Spanish starts out with like, okay, when you're arrested, say this. It's just like when you,
but good sell.
Well, but it also, everything has, and it tells you, like, the English translation is like, okay, so you've been arrested because you're blonde. So, try not to be blonde and go to Mexico. But if you are, okay, you get arrested. Then you say, oh, officer, you don't need to write me a ticket. Here, I have a whole bunch of tickets in my wallet. Then it says, okay, and then it says, wow, officer, do you really need so many? And it's just a whole... Oh, and it's equally, first of all, and it's true. So, but it's equally offensive to sort of all cultures. And I've forgotten what it was for the U, but it was Wicked Germany, Wicked whatever, and it was as culturally offensive as you could imagine. But on the flip side, it's like, yeah, that's what you're facing if you're there. So, I think I told you this. My first girlfriend was from Argentina, and we were talking once, and she said, I'm starting to get to know you enough that I guess I could ask you this question. I was like, yeah, sure, shoot. She goes, how much do you bribe officers here in the U.S.? And I was just like, whoa. To have a conversation. She got pissed because she thought she actually did. She lost her temper with me and basically said she was never going to speak to me again. Cause she's like, I thought we could talk about things, and this is I guess she knew it was maybe culturally insensitive, so she figured that we could trust each other enough that she could ask a question like, how much do you bribe the cops? And I was just like, no, I'm being honest. You don't do that in this country. You really don't do that. And that's not to say, and you and I both know it hasn't been successfully done, but it's been done by people, A, with a shit ton more money, and B, with an organization involved in doing it. If you get pulled over, don't. It's beyond anything I would do, anyone I know would do.
I bet Abraham Lincoln would like to talk. Yeah, that's going to go over real well.
And we're back to people who get shot by cops. Oh, dear Lord. It took her like a day later. She came back, and apparently she'd asked some people. She's like, I guess you were telling the truth. I was like, yeah. It's like, I get you. She had lived in Argentina, then I think Peru or some other. She'd lived in a couple of different, and I was just like, yeah, this is a different set of circumstances. Oh, dear Lord.
Well, my dad had a interesting run-in with an Egyptian police officer.
Really?
My dad was a photographer. He loved taking photographs of everything. And
yeah, I'll bet. I'm just going to cut you off right there.
I don't mean in connection with his work. That was,
okay.
Yes, he liked taking those photos too, but
okay, sorry.
Let's be honest here. This was just, crowd shots, basically. He just loved taking pictures of people and the scenery and so forth. So they were in the train station waiting to go from Alexandria to Cairo. It might have been the other way around, but I'm pretty sure it was that. Anyway, so he was just wandering around with his camera, snapping pictures. And some officious Egyptian police officer comes up and starts lecturing him, for some reason, in Russian. You cannot take photos here, blah, 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 blah. Now, this was in the mid-'60s, just before the Six-Day War. And so my dad just kind of let it ride and let the guy assume he was Russian. And the guy was clearly fishing for a give me some bakshish, I'll let you take all the photographs you want kind of game. And so my dad just kind of ignored him, pretending he didn't understand what the guy was saying, and just continued snapping photographs because he knew there was no way that they were going to arrest a Russian when they were on the verge of, having that little fracas with the Israelis in '67. And the Russians were supplying them with all their toys. And he still has somewhere the final shot as they're getting on the train and the policeman's glowering real angrily at them. And he leans over and takes a big picture right in the guy's face.
Oh.
So somewhere there is an Egyptian policeman who is convinced that the Russians are the worst people on the planet.
I have only half a story here for this one, and maybe somebody here knows what the other half would plausibly have been. I could have figured it out. I just didn't, and I don't remember why. I just wanted to have nothing to do with it. I was in Rome, and I was seeing the Sistine Chapel, and they're crystal clear about their position on taking photos anywhere near the Sistine Chapel. That's a very big fucking no-no. And you got to realize, when you're in Rome, you are in another country. The Vatican is its own country. And they have their own laws, their own police, and if you fuck with them, there's very little anyone else can do if they don't want it. And you should probably remember that. It's not,
you go to Pope jail.
Exactly. And it's not like they're looking to cause trouble. In fact, the exact opposite. They want everyone to feel welcome there. But having said that, don't cause trouble. So this guy starts taking photos, and I see that he's taking photos, and part of me is just like, well, wow, maybe they're not that serious about it, so maybe I should. I was just like, no, I'm not going to take photos. I'm just not going to bother. And he's trying to be very surreptitious about it. Well, they caught him, and officer comes up to him and says, give me your phone. He goes, no. He's like, oh, shit. I was like, I don't think you can say that to the Vatican.
Come out of your mouth at that moment.
And he says, were you taking photos? He goes, no. He goes, show me the last photo on your phone. So, well, they've dealt with this before. And this officer was pissed. My wife's moving forward, and I knew I'd explain to her, no, I wanted to see what they do. So I don't know what they did. They could take his phone, and he's got zero recourse, and there is nothing he can do if they take his phone. So I don't know if they took his phone. I don't know if he got a spanking. I don't know what happened. But I maybe somebody else has seen something like this and can tell me and I was sitting there going, I'm going to regret it if I don't stay and watch. And my father, too, is just like, what happened? What happened? I was like, I don't know. He goes, you asshole. You can't start the story and then end that way. So now I've done it to you. Yeah.
So somewhere in the Vatican archives is this seized telephone.
Oh, I going to the Vatican was one of the most surreal experiences of my fucking life. The wealth there was staggering, and they're making very little effort to hide it. you look at the Sistine Chapel. In fact, I went to St. Peter's first. I was at St. Peter's Basilica, and it feels to me, looking at it, like they'd have a hard time building that thing today. And I'm looking at this saying, okay, they didn't do this with modern equipment. They did this with basically a pretty good knowledge of engineering and how to put these things together. And it was all indulgences, but they end up, managing to build this thing together. And it was actually kind of sad because I was just like, it's one of the most beautiful things I think probably ever made when you take a look at it. But, there was A, this hypocrisy to it, and B, how many people suffered so that this thing could get built, and where else could that money have gone? And then you go to their museum where it's sort of like, and we stole this. I mean, we borrowed this. This just fell out of the sky in Africa. We don't know how this happened. And you took a look at it, and it just had all the labels of this is where it's from. This is the country it's from.
This 100-ton obelisk just fell out of the sky, and we decided we'd take it home with us.
And it's and I think recently they just decided to give something back, and I forget what it was, but I remember it was a little triggering because their sort of response to that was, well, we kind of sort of realized that maybe we should, but they don't like to give back even a single thing because it's sort of like apologizing, right? It took them 2,000 years to apologize to Galileo. There's a reason; they're infallible. If they apologize, it opens up a floodgate they don't want to have opened. And I'm aware that I'm oversimplifying it. I'm aware of the Pope's infallibility and the limits of it, but nonetheless, it as a general principle.
I don't think it's just the Pope or religion. I mean, that's kind of what's going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, Putin cannot admit that he made a mistake by doing this stupid thing, and authoritarians everywhere suffer from that same kind of mindset. It's I cannot admit that I made a mistake, because if I do, then suddenly I am not the infallible human that I've told you all that I am, which calls into question everything that's ever come out of my mouth.
That's a good point. Do you think there's a way that you could have a dictatorship that was benevolent?
I think an argument can be made that some of the Roman Empire emperors were, but the trouble is when it's an institution like that and you have a giant bureaucracy behind you, everybody is in that same mindset. And there's no way you can possibly have everybody in the let's be forgiving and logical and empathic. You're always going to have people who somewhere in that bureaucratic organization are going, I got to protect my phony baloney job and make sure that you understand you cannot question me, even though it's obvious now that I'm wrong, but we can't have that because then I lose my job. And it's part of that same extension of the authoritarian mindset that runs in them. So in individuals who are authoritarians being decent people, yes. But as an organization, I think it's extremely unlikely that you would have something like that, simply because the chances of everybody being a decent human being, not so much.
If you consider the family unit, perhaps communist, consider them sort of essentially communist. You don't make the kids work. You share the bounty with the kids, but the kids are obviously not expected to carry the same weight, and they, so you have on a small scale communism there. Maybe on other small scales communism works, ends up failing from what we've seen on a large scale in just about any meaningful way. Is capitalism, do you think, the only... Nice, we got a fireside chat here. Let's talk some easy topics. Is capitalism the only one that can work to scale. And you and I think, are both crystal clear that there are some pretty serious fucking drawbacks to capitalism. But it seems like communism does not work at scale. It seems like you're saying that
communism's failure is that it fails to account for human nature. Capitalism's failure is that it assumes human nature to be bad, but then says that bad nature of human nature is what makes the system work, so it can't be all bad. So it's 6 and 1/2 dozen of the other in a large respect.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah.
And I think what you need is a kind of a mix of the two. You need a capitalist system that motivates people to want to excel, to improve their lot. That provides for those who can't, and that's both the can't because of some sort of impairment on their part or simply willful refusal, but it's doing something to try to prevent people from needless suffering, if you will. Now, is communism like that? No, because again, human nature intrudes. But if you read it at face value, that arguably is what it's going to try to do. It doesn't. And anybody who tells you that capitalism's great because the market will correct itself, if you're unethical, people won't buy your product. Well, yeah, perhaps, except you're unethical enough to put all your competitors out of business. They have no choice but to buy your product.
Pippa here, counter argument: human nature under communism would be different, better. Everybody wants to contribute and be valued for doing so. I will say this: capitalists, I think. Okay. Let me do an adjunct to that before.
Richard Pryor.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, you can tell us your real feelings in a minute.
Humor.
Well, I agree that we do have an instinct to want to be of service, and I think that's why AA works the way it does. I think that human beings who find themselves not being of service in one way or another, I do think that can get twisted and warped, and I think you can get... oh, yeah, okay, I don't want to get into... I think the healthiest human beings are of service in some way and feel valued for what they can provide that others either can't or can't do as well. I do think that that's instinctive, but does that carry enough to make communism work? It doesn't appear so in any sense that I've seen on the large scale. Anyways, please, you seemed to have one or two minor objections to the
Me? Or God, where did it come from? I wish I could remember the comedy routine. Motherfucker. Wah. But I mean, that's the kind of the way it applies here, which is that I think people may think they're going into it with good intentions, but there are always exceptions. And people will come up with the most ridiculous jump through a hoop excuses to justify things that aren't ethical, aren't proper, whatever, because it benefits them personally. And I just don't think that kind of, the Star Trek utopian, well, because we have a matter energizer that can create anything out of pure energy, we're all happy. We don't need to have money to get. It's a pie in the sky utopia that doesn't really exist.
I think one thing about the start
goal to aim towards, but not a practical goal to achieve. I think it'd be the best way to put it.
I do think the human race will be unified in finding an alien species that we can go to war with. I think that would. I think that would work. I think if we could find an alien species to dominate, we'd all be like, "Oh, we're humans. Let's go get them."
Yeah. You just pushed one of my hot button.
Oh.
Why are the aliens always the bad guys who are invading and going to destroy us, that we have to unify to stop them?
Oh, I'm thinking the other way around. I'm thinking we're the bad guys who invade them. That's what's going to unify the U.S.
That I can buy into in a heartbeat.
That's what I'm saying.
Our cultural heritage proves that's what we'll do.
No, if the reverse happens, we will lose, and we will lose instantaneously. If we encounter, first of all, okay, I have a theory. And I disagree with Stephen Hawking on this one, and I get people all the time saying, "How dare you disagree with Stephen Hawking?" And I'm like, you realize this is not his field of expertise. He was asked a question, and it's an interesting question. It sounds like it's his area of expertise. It's kind of a science question, but it's not. So yeah, I disagree with him. Somebody was asking about what happens if the U.S. encounters an alien species, and he said, "Oh, we're going to get wiped out. They're going to be hostile. Take a look at what everybody who's discovered another race of human beings on this planet or another culture has done to the native culture." There's a lot of truth to that. But I do think there are differences, and I think that, what we do to each other, believe it or not, is a different set of circumstances. It seems to me, in order for us to survive the nuclear age and to not wipe every living thing out off the face of the planet, our empathy is going to have to exceed the power of our adrenal glands and the way we react to what we perceive as hostile encounters. Our success on the planet as becoming the dominant species is in large part because of our empathy. We could not organize advanced civilizations without having some empathy. And there's this balancing act between that level of empathy, but still having the ability to combat the Hobbesian state of nature. So it's not like, oh, life will be great if we can get rid of our hostile instincts. No, we actually do need those too. So the question is, where do you balance that line? But it seems to me the ultimate success and the ability to get a civilization that is sustainable hinges on bringing up the empathy level so that you're not just slaves to this, we're going to kill each other, because you can't build a sustainable society that way. So my argument is that any civilization that is capable of building, of surviving long enough to build something that allows them to travel in essence faster than the speed of light, that could get them to come here and talk to us. If they wanted to destroy us, could do so without us even knowing they exist. This isn't Independence Day. We're not it's over. There's no point in having a discussion about could we beat them. No, it's done. They would be orders of magnitude more powerful than us. But all that notwithstanding, I have to believe they probably wouldn't be interested in doing it, because I think in order for them to have survived that long without wiping themselves and everything else out on whatever their home planet is, they would have to have had a greater sense of empathy that they had developed and an understanding of how to work cooperatively, including but not limited to with inferior animals, whatever other species on their planet, and ultimately on other planets. So I think any species that could actually make it to us is probably got far more to worry about us, and would be aware, because they're not stupid if they can travel here. So they'd realize would be the hostile natives that they don't want to engage with, because we're just going to kill anything we see. That's my theory. Well,
I can't remember the name of the book. I remember the author's name, which is Frank Chadwick. He wrote a science fiction novel which postulated two things. One, that when the hyper-advanced aliens show up, they basically end up owning our asses, not because they attack and conquer, but they simply use a version of copyright law. They say, oh, you want the technology to do this? That's fine. Sign over all your mineral rights to this. Oh, you want this? Do that. You know? And they end up basically owning everything. The only two things that humans excel at, one is in the entertainment industry because we're creative and we can create music and literature and so forth. And number two, and this is what I thought was hilariously clever, organized crime.
Really?
Because the postulate was the aliens do not understand the subtle nuances of how you make organized crime work. So the people who are unethical and unprincipled enough to figure out how to pull that game off become quite powerful and quite wealthy. But it was just an interesting premise to see that in the story, which is that, you know, humans become the underdogs in everything except these two very narrow fields.
I think that's very creative. The organized crime one I really like. I like, because I like the sense of it, the one about art and Hollywood and all that other good stuff. But I there's no way I'd buy that, and the reason is because I think my suspicion is there's a huge biological component to what we find interesting creatively.
Yeah, which they necessarily wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the argument there was that it's like a fascination with primitive art or something.
Oh, okay. Now I'm going to have to look this up.
It's not that. Yeah, it's not that, you know, oh, the Beatles are such great musicians and music resonates
that's what I thought.
Creatures or anything. It's like, oh, look at this quaint bunch of savages. Listen to this they call music. Isn't it amusing?
Okay, so they're not like listening to Mozart saying, "Oh my God, we found something." Okay, that makes sense. Well, I mentioned Mozart. I want to say one last thing, and I want to go. It's slightly off topic, but it's just an interesting thing. So I used to teach writing, and there's a thing that all writers have to overcome, which is this sense that their writing is awesome and spectacular. I'm going to compete right off the bat with Hemingway or anything like that. Hemingway himself said, a writer should never do anything to dissuade other writers from thinking that he wasn't born great. And Hemingway's early works were exactly as you'd expect. Shit, he had to learn. But I talk to people who say, "Oh no, I just did this in one draft and it's done." And I'm like, there's no human being who's ever done that in the sense that people are talking about. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way for very specific reasons once you start to think about it. Like, nope. I'm one of those who writes in one draft. Like, there's only one human being that I'm aware of. And even then, but it's interesting, there's only one human being who ever produced anything of quality in one draft, ever. And that was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And I think it's fair to compare music and writing. They have a tremendous amount in common, especially actually writing symphonies. A tremendous amount in common. And he could write entire symphonies, a 4-hour symphony, without getting a single note wrong. Yeah, right out of his head. Now, I will tell you this. I do think he drafted. But I think he drafted in his head. It's possible he didn't draft and he just did all that in one take. My suspicion is he did draft, but it was in his head. But at a minimum, when it was printed out, he printed it out once it was done, end of discussion. And so I was like, so if you're as good as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, you go ahead and tell me that you're going to do this in one draft. Hemingway couldn't.
100 years and see if you're still popular.
Yeah. But that's one of the things for all the other things about Mozart. He, aside from the fact he was obviously a genius, it was like that is unparalleled, and it's just like this human being who can sit there and say, "I'm going to write a symphony today." Boom, done. And to understand sort of how his life turned out, it's an interesting statement on how we up. Now, to be fair, most of his music wasn't understood well by people. It took a while.
Certainly not in his own age, yeah.
Yeah. He wrote so well, it was beyond the capacity for most people to sort of catch and understand the brilliance of it. So, but it's still, it's an interesting thing to think about. So when I talk about any kind of creative endeavor and the drafting process and how that works, Mozart is my go-to. And the other thing was there was obviously the movie 𝗲𝗲 had very little bearing with reality, and in fact Salieri and Mozart were actually friends. No, Salieri wasn't responsible for his death or ever trying to kill him, and from all reports they were actually genuine friends. But there's this great scene in it.
You know where that rumor came from, don't you?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's like 100 years after the two of them. And it's somebody writing a novel. And that's where it gets written into it. And then, it's like watching Fox News. It takes on a life of its own. And suddenly, oh, yeah, Salieri murdered him. It's like,
That's what happened with Columbus. Christopher Columbus was acknowledged to be a horrific human being. He came back in chains. Everybody knew this. He had his admiralty stripped from him. Nobody thought he was a particularly great guy. Certainly nobody thought he had discovered the U.S.
Sure as hell wasn't an original navigator.
Yeah. Nobody took him seriously. And then, oh, dear Lord, now I've forgotten who it was. Wrote the Life and Times of Christopher Columbus. I think was it Longfellow? No, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. It may have been Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Decides he's going to novelize. It's the very first, basically, novelized history. The first we know about. It's been done before, but the first big successful novelized history, and in it, he's just like, I have to make this guy big. I have to sell books. Which is essentially what he was trying to do, and Gee, I can't believe all these names are probably like Samuel Longhorn Clemens. No, it was not Mark Twain. Jesus, but I don't think it was. Anyways, so he decides he's got to make it big, and so he says, "Oh, he was sailing to prove the Earth was round." Everybody had known. I mean, that was the year they invented the globe in Germany. Everybody knew these things, but because he's writing and there's no social media, his book becomes social media, and all of a sudden, everything that he says, this utter horse shit. About everybody knew the Earth was round, that it had been proven round in 500 BC, and correctly calculated, which Columbus failed to do. So yeah, we got this. So, anyways, there you go. Writers trying to fictionalize history. I mean, just imagine all the damage that's been done by turning Columbus into a hero. So so Salieri wasn't. So I didn't realize that that's where it came from, another author trying to do that. You gotta be, authors are sneaky. You got to be a little careful with writers.
Right.
So, oh yeah, there was a great scene in the movie though, in Amadeus, where he's presented with a gift of a small piece that was written by Salieri to a play when Mozart first comes in, and they offer him.
Salieri composes the march.
Yes.
The emperor plays the march.
Yes.
And on that one hearing, not even seeing the music, but just listening to the emperor, who is a horrible piano player, play it, Mozart says, "Oh, it's like this. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's do it this way instead. This is much better."
Yeah, well, they offer to give him. They hand it to him, right? They hand it to him. He goes, "No, I don't need it. Thank you, though. You keep it as a souvenir." Sure. And they're like, "What do you mean you don't need it?" He's like, "I got it up here. You played it once. I know it now." I'm like, "Prove it." He sits down. He says, and he plays it. He's like, "That doesn't quite work, does it? Let's do this." Boom, 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 boom. And 30 seconds later, boom, one of the most magnificent pieces you've ever heard, based on the original. Oh, dear Lord. Now, I don't know if that scene ever happened or not. I do know he was friends with Salieri, and certainly what's good about that scene is it shows you what he could do. The scene was accurate of his skills. Whether or not it actually happened probably doesn't matter. But it's a great scene. And in that scene, though, Salieri is getting pissed. You just see the seething hatred because he took weeks writing it, and Mozart's just like, that's not really very good, is it? Let's mix that up a bit. Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to get going. I'm going to go spend a little time with the family. I'm going to get some sleep. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, we are going to have on Operator Starsky, new anchor for ABC News or CBS. He really did do very well with that. So we're going to have him on tomorrow. I think we're going to have a lot to discuss with China and also, Titan's right. Friends with Salieri. They were friendly, but I think Titan's correct.
Well, still competitors.
Let me rephrase that. Titan's not wrong. So I gotta make sure that I'm keeping that in check. But at any rate, so we'll have him on. I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about with China. I think there's obviously the president. That was the other one. I love the conspiracy theories. You probably saw this because I know you follow it. So like somebody had pointed out that all of these new flights just started. These really bizarre circling flights were coming out of countries in the EU, and like, oh my God, there's an attack happening. Something's about to happen. What's going on? And somebody's like, or this. It's like President of the United States is in Ukraine. He's like, yeah, these are cap patrols being launched by every NATO country. They're not messing around. It was just funny. Anyway, so we'll talk about that, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to discuss. But it was an absolute delight, as always, to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you for frittering away another 90 minutes with us. We always love to. I love chatting with you, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right, talk to you tomorrow, and see you all tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Operator Starsky, Ukrainian National Guardsman, we're going to have him on, and we're going to discuss what's been going on in this last week in the war. Thank you all for joining us. See you tomorrow.